From Washington, here is the news in VOA Special English. 4 separate bombings killed more than 110 people in Pakistan Thursday. Almost 250 people were wounded. Police in Quetta, the capital of Baluchistan province, say a suicide bomber blew himself up inside a crowded building. A second explosion happened minutes later. The explosions killed 81 people, including police and rescue workers. More than 100 people were wounded. Police say most of the deaths happened after the second explosion caused the roof of the building to collapse. The attacks came just hours after a bomb blast at a market in Quetta that killed 11 people. Officials say paramilitary soldiers may have been the target of the attack. The illegal Sunni Muslim group Lashkar-e-Taiba, Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, told reporters in Quetta that it was responsible for the attacks. American Defense Secretary Leon Panetta says the struggle to ensure that Afghanistan can govern itself and avoid once again becoming a safe place for terrorists is coming to an end. Mr. Panetta spoke at the beginning of his meeting Thursday with Afghan President Hamid Karzai. He said more than 10 years of war have prepared Afghanistan to govern itself. Mr. Karzai said he was grateful for the years of support from the United States and Afghanistan's other allies. The Afghan president also met with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton on Thursday. On Friday, he will meet with President Obama. The United Nations Security Council is to meet in an emergency session late Thursday to talk about the crisis in Mali. The meeting will not be open to the public or to reporters. The announcement of the meeting comes just hours after witnesses said Islamist rebels had seized a town northeast of the capital, Bamako, from government troops. Rebels in the Central African Republic say they have agreed to a temporary ceasefire with the government. Representatives of the Salika rebel coalition say they reached the agreement Thursday during talks with the government and opposition leaders. The talks took place in Gabon's capital, Libreville. The ceasefire is reportedly for 1 week. There was no immediate confirmation from the government that an agreement had been reached. You are listening to the news in VOA Special English. French police say 3 Kurdish activists have been shot to death in Paris. The French Interior Minister called the deaths an assassination. Police said the bodies of 3 women were found with bullet wounds early Thursday morning at a Kurdish information center. One of the dead was a founding member of the Kurdistan Workers' Party. The group has been fighting for greater Kurdish self-rule in Turkey. A second woman worked at the center and was the Paris representative of the Kurdistan National Congress. The third victim was described as a young activist. Russia says it will permit an adoption agreement with the United States to continue for the next year. The agreement will stay in place even though the Russian parliament recently approved a law that bans adoptions of Russian children by Americans. A spokesman for Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke to the state-run RIA Novosti news agency. He said the adoption agreement will remain in place until early January 2014. He said the agreement must remain in place for 1 year from the time one of the countries tells the other that it plans to make changes to the agreement. A report by a labor organization says more than 52 million people around the world, most of them women, work in the home of another person. They cook, clean, and care for children. The report says most of these so-called domestic workers have little legal protection and can be abused. VOA's Steve Ember has more in this report.
The report is the first of its kind by the International Labor Organization. The group says most domestic workers face poor conditions on the job. ILO Deputy Director General Sandra Pulaski says domestic workers experience violations of their human rights at work.
Live-in domestic workers in particular are often exposed to physical, mental, or sexual abuse and harassment, and to restrictions on their freedom of movement. Migrant domestic workers face additional vulnerabilities to exploitation and abuse.
It says more than half of all domestic workers have no legal limit on working hours. Almost half have no right to weekly rest periods or paid holidays. Official counts show Asia and the Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean with the most domestic workers. In the Middle East, 1 in 3 working women is a domestic worker. The ILO considers the estimates low. An ILO working conditions specialist says counts in Africa show more than 5 million domestic workers, but the number is believed to be much higher. The report notes Asia and the Middle East have the weakest legal protections. But ILO officials say there is hope. In 2011, the ILO held a conference to establish rights for domestic workers. The report found that the efforts by the ILO Domestic Workers Convention have already led results in many ILO member states. Officials say reforms have begun or are waiting for approval in 13 countries. I'm Steve Ember.
Finally, in Special English News, supporters of Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez gathered at the presidential home in the capital, Caracas, Thursday. They were showing their support for Mr. Chavez, who is too sick to go to his swearing-in. Several Latin American presidents, including José Mujica of Uruguay, Bolivia's Evo Morales, and Daniel Ortega of Nicaragua, were at the gathering in Caracas. Mr. Chavez's inauguration for a new term was planned for Thursday, but he remains in Cuba, where he is recovering from cancer surgery.